Hello, everyone. Well, this is Marilyn Shannon, and I haven't been here in a little while. I've been working on many different projects that I am passionate about, and I know that you would agree with. But today I'm starting a whole new regime. We're going to come back with all kinds of new information and things that are pertinent to your life and to mine. And with that, I have a friend here today who is brilliant. And when I thought about doing the first newish video, I thought of her. So, Lesli Dill, welcome. How are you?
Hi, Marilyn. I'm well and so excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Well, I'm so happy you're here. And so we're going to do a talk for about 10, 15 minutes, and it's not going to be enough. I promise. You're going to want more. So we're going to come back and do this more. But I want to give you some highlights, and then I want you to take it out into the world, and then I want you to come back for part 2, 3, 4, 10, whatever it is. Okay, Lesli, tell everybody who you are and what you do.
So, my name is Lesli Dill. I use she, her pronouns. In my professional life, I work for an amazing organization called Carolina's Care Partnership, where I manage the opt out program. It's a SAMHSA funded program, and I've been doing nonprofit work for a little over 2.5 years. But my background is primarily in higher education. I was at a North Carolina university for 12 years before coming to this work. And so my passion is for education. And I think the only thing that I'm as equally passionate about is equity and inclusion. So the two come together and marry very well. Yeah.
So, can you explain what you mean by that, equity and inclusion?
So what I mean by that is that the way, and I'll say this, so my background is primarily sexual and reproductive health. And the way that sexual and reproductive health was taught when I was in school, for instance, was very heteronormative. And what I mean by that is that all sex was talked about as if it was a man and woman engaging in these activities. And so as soon as I went into the work, it was important to talk about things in a way that doesn't apply a gender to a body, but very much just talks about an activity that someone might be engaging in. And by doing that, you are bringing people who may not be in hetero relationships into the conversation around safety. And a lot of the work that I do now is it's very important that we're using that neutral and inclusive language. The work that I'm doing now is around substance use disorder, opioid use disorder, decreasing stigma related to those things, and also increasing access to services for people in historically marginalized groups, including LGBTQ youth and young adults.
And so, why does having the right pronouns or that right identity really make a difference?
That's a really great question. And that's something that I get asked a lot. And typically, when people are, I guess, don't really put a lot of weight in it. So, when I introduced myself just now, I said, my name's Lesli Dill, and I use she, her pronouns. When I do that, that message is not necessarily for people who are cisgender. Cis means same. So, Marilyn, if you were born, you came out, the doctor looked in between your legs and said, it's a girl. And then you grew up and you said, okay, yeah, I identify with what's between my legs. That means you're cisgender. So you were born, your sex assigned at birth was female. You grow up and you say, okay, I'm female. I agree with that. If you're transgender, whatever sex assigned at birth that you were given based on your external characteristics, if you grow up and you say, gosh, I don't really identify with how I was labeled at birth, then you would be transgender. And this is very shallow. This is like the very top layer of this, and we can get into it more later. But that's kind of the basics. And so for people who are transgender, when they hear me, someone who appears to be straight, cisgender, you look at me and you're like, okay, that's Leslie. She uses she, her pronouns. Why would she need to say that out loud? It's because it then gives permission to other people who may not have been given that same permission to say, okay, Leslie said her pronouns, I can say my pronouns. And so it's basically me using my cisgender privilege to open the gates and open the platform for other people to feel comfortable identifying themselves with whatever pronouns they choose.
Interesting. So the conversation about gender
Hmm.
is exploding.
Hmm.
What can you do? What can you say about that?
A couple of things come to mind. So I think that when you think about the acronym LGBTQ, the L and the G and the B, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, I think at this point, if you say those words, people have a pretty good understanding of what that is. People get more confused and there's more questions around gender identities. So trans people, when it comes to, so I'm going to take it back even a little
Okay.
second further than that. From the time that we are very small kids, we're in this very binary world. It's this or that, it's left or right, it's black or white. Sometimes when I'm in spaces, what I want people to think about is like, when you're little, there's like those little toys for like 1-year olds. They're little plastic boxes. And on the outside, they have shapes. And on the inside, there's these little toys that you pull out and you have to put them in that exact shape. And they have to fit in there for you to get it right, for you to get it all together. And so from a very young age, we're taught that things need to be categorized and for them to make sense. And so what's really hard for people to understand and more or less accept about gender and sexuality is that it's all on this continuum and it ebbs and flows and it moves. And just because one day I might say to you, "Hey, my name's Leslie, and I'm a lesbian," you could see me in 2 years and I could be dating a man. And so for people who need things to be this way, and a lot of times it's the hardest for the people to understand who things are very static. If they're like, I'm cisgender, I'm straight, all of these things, and you live in a society that says that's what's right and good and understandable, anything outside of that is sort of like messing with your need to have things be static and understandable. And so people don't like the word privilege, but it's a point of privilege that nobody's ever misgendered you.
Mm.
If nobody's ever looked at you and used he, him pronouns, that's a point of privilege because you walk around in the world
You don't have to
and
use it.
you don't have to. You know what I'm saying? And so for people who don't have that issue, it's
Mhm.
like, something else, something new, some new language we got to use. That's another thing that I was getting ready to say is that when I thought about the two different things, is that we are just now coming into a place in our society where it's becoming more okay for these identities to exist and to be talked about. And so within the queer community, there's always new language coming out to identify and use words for these things. It's not that these things are new, these concepts are not new at all. They've been around for millennia. But if they're not accepted and you're not allowed to talk about them, there's never been a need to have language around them because you just didn't talk about it. So we're hearing there's always new language and new words, and it's because of where we're at as a society right now. And the people who are typically most bothered by that, by this new language and new concepts, is people who've never had to think about those things for themselves or their family.
Well, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, for all of you listening, I had heard Leslie speak like this, and she was talking about the words. And words are very important. I mean, using words, the right language, I mean, sets the pace, sets the tone, sets the connection or not. And it's very important. And we send the right message. And when you described queer, like I was
Hmm.
always afraid to use the word queer because I thought if I used the word queer, that I was being derogatory
Hmm.
because how I've always used the word queer before.
Hmm.
But you made it seem like it was like the right thing to do. So can you share that definition of queer?
I can. And so there's a couple of different ways to think about this. So to your point, I think it's also generational. I think that older generations, when they hear certain words, they think of it that way as being derogatory. And you can think about words that are used for various marginalized communities that, you hear those words and you're just like, ooh, like, no, 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 you can't use that. I will say that any of the words that have been reclaimed by communities with lived experience can still be used in a derogatory way. It's all in the way that you say it and how someone could still use the word queer to be ugly, to be derogatory. You could still do that. Um, so when I said that my background's in higher education, and so when I went to work at the university in 2007, 2008, I wouldn't say that queer was a word that I used very often, but in working with the LGBTQ students on that campus, they said, like, we're reclaiming this word. This is a national movement. Like, we are taking this word, we are going to use this word, we are going to take away all of the power that it has to hurt us, and we're going to use it. One thing that I do say is that when I go into communities or presentations or whatever, and Marilyn, to your point, the reason why you heard me explain why I use that word is because people still need to hear why I use that word. And I still need to, in some sense, ask for permission to use that word without, identifying myself and all of my identities personally. When I come into a space, I look straight, I look cisgender, I look all of these things. And so when you think about people with lived experience who have reclaimed this word, I, in some ways, still need to ask for permission to use that word. And oftentimes I do. The way that I explain using queer and why I use the word queer is sort of like this. So, hey, my name's Leslie and I'm a lesbian, right? I shake your hand and you're like, oh, okay, Leslie's a lesbian. I get to safely put her in the lesbian box and she's just going to stay there. And I get that. Like, I can comprehend that. If I come up to you and I say, hey, Marilyn, my name's Leslie, I'm queer. And you're immediately need more information, don't understand. And what that does is it gives the power back to that person to identify themselves however they want to in that moment. And it can be related to their sexual identity or sexual orientation, as you've also probably heard it called, or it could be in relationship to their gender identity or their gender expression, which are two totally separate concepts. And that'll probably have to be covered on another thing. But they're two totally different things. That how you identify with your own gender and who you're sexually attracted to are two very different things, but they're often lumped together. And I think that's just kind of from like a lack of knowing and comfort and all of those kinds of things. But that's why I use the word queer, because it's empowering for a lot of the queer communities to use that term. But I also recognize that it can still be used in a derogatory way, just like lots of words can that have historically been used to harm marginalized communities.
So when you say you ask permission, so if
Hmm.
I'm talking to you or I'm
Hmm.
talking to someone,
Hmm.
so we don't freely use the word queer unless you ask.
So I wouldn't say that regularly. I'm always very cognizant of the places that I'm at, the people that I'm speaking with. In my home, my family's very used to me using the word queer. If I'm talking to a colleague, I use the word queer. Most of the time where I ask for permission or feel like there needs to be sort of an attachment, sort of an explanation for that word is when I'm in community, when I'm out doing presentations, for instance, when we did the Prism event. I think it's important for me in those spaces when I'm doing presentations to say, this is why. And this is based on constructive feedback that I've received from presentations that I've done in the past, where somebody somebody was like, you said queer, and I was just like, oh, like I couldn't focus on anything else because, I've not heard people use it in that way. And so if I just take a minute or two at the beginning of a presentation or a community conversation just to notice that I'm using that word, and why I use that word, it just kind of frees it up, and people are like, oh, okay. And I sort of, when I'm presenting, actually, I use LGBTQ plus and queer kind of interchangeably as I'm talking. But I think that I also appreciate when I use the word queer and somebody's like, why do you use that word? Like, why not use a different word or what have you? Because these conversations are important.
Mhm.
And it's important that we talk about these things so that people have a better understanding. And then that leads to learning and expansion.
So, members of the LGBTQ plus community
Mhm.
want to be they feel they're queer. That is
Um,
where they identify.
it's a personal choice.
The
I'm
person.
sure that all people who are within the LGBTQ plus community do not agree with the word queer.
Okay.
I'm sure that that's not the case for everyone. Queer is just kind of a blanket term that I use, and some people and other people who do education, because queer can mean identity, sexual attraction, or gender. And some people have, some combination of the two, and some people are just one or the other or whatever. So it's just kind of this like inclusive term to like look at all of those different things. But I absolutely don't think that all people who fall within the LGBTQ plus community identify with the word queer at all.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, no, absolutely not. Mm-mm.
Okay, there's so much to talk
I
about.
know.
There's science, there's medical, there's history, there's a lot. But one of the main things, besides this conversation about queer, that I've gotten from Leslie today, and I would like to think you all heard this, but I'm going to, reiterate it a little bit, is change is hard. Change is hard. And we
Mhm.
know, and I'm a she, her. I'm married to a man, but change is hard. And so when we look at people who are making these outlandish changes, it's hard to comprehend. It's hard to understand. So if you find yourself in that place, what would you say people should do in order to make the change so that they know? Because I mean, I could be in my head and I could be like, are you kidding? LGBTQ? Ooh, what? But I don't want to be that person. I want to be open. I want to be loving. I want to be accepting. So what would you tell me from yesterday or from last week if I wasn't?
I will tell you, just like I tell some of my other friends and family who don't have the same background that I do, if you changing the way that you say something could impact someone's life in a way of, one thing that I've said, and this is more to the point, trans people who identify as trans are astronomically more likely to attempt suicide or complete suicide in their lifetime versus someone who's cisgender. This is not true because they are trans. It is true because of the way society treats them because they are trans. So, what I would say is, if you think about it from the idea of me using this term or me introducing myself with pronouns in an open meeting could be the difference in someone's mental health that day. Their mental well being could be positively impacted just by you using affirming terms. Why, as one human to another, would we not just do that? I mean, it's not a lot of extra energy. I mean, yes, there's a learning curve, and hopefully by having these types of conversations, we're going to help with some of that learning. But I would absolutely say that you have the capacity. They say too, like if you walk past someone, look them in the eyes and smile at them and say hello. That could be the only hello and smile that they get all day. And for the people that identify within any marginalized community, just making them feel affirmed and seen and accepted can literally be the difference between life and death for some people. And we as humans should be looking out for each other. And it's that easy.
Yes, it is. And it isn't going to go away no matter what people think.
Mm-mm.
It
It's
ain't going
not.
to get squished away. It isn't going to
Mm-mm.
disappear. We're not going to take that queer man
Mm-hmm.
and make him straight. Ain't going to happen. Not going to take that queer lady or they and make them straight. Ain't going to happen. It's going to make it worse. So conversations like this are important. And I would like to reach out to all of you and say, please comment, share your thoughts, share your feelings. If you've been in situations before that have been uncomfortable, please share it. Ask questions of us. If you are a member of the LGBTQ community, I'd love to hear from you. I'm not afraid to share. We're not afraid to share. We must talk about this. So please leave us messages. Join our YouTube channel. And Leslie, any final words?
Yeah, comment, leave your feedback. I'm always open to constructive criticism. And I would also say that if you have any ideas or if there were particular components or parts of the conversation that we just had that you want to delve deeper into, let your comments inform where we go from here, and we'll keep having the conversations.
Yes, and then I know that Leslie, next Wednesday on the 29th of March, so this is
Mhm.
March of 2023 if you're listening to this and it's 24. But next week, if it's 23, Leslie's going to be doing a full presentation on uh, LGBTQ and word and communication and all of that stuff. Please write to me and I'll give you the information on how to come, and it's free.
Mhm.
All right. So, with that, everyone, thanks so much. Come back and visit us again because we're going to talk about all kinds of things. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about everything. Come back. We'll see you soon. Bye. Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, that was so fun.